Malcolm X was born on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, born as Malcolm Little. His parents, Louise and Earl Little, had 8 children. Earl was a civil rights activist, and his life was threatened several times by the Black Legion. In 1929, Malcolm's house caught fire, but not that much. 2 years later, Earl was found dead across the trolley tracks. Following his death, Louis suffered an emotional breakdown and was sent to a mental institution, while Malcolm and his siblings was sent to foster homes and orphanages. Eventually, Malcolm moved back to Boston. In 1946, Malcolm was sentenced to 10 years in Massachusetts State Prison on burglary charges. After 7 years serving in prison, Malcolm was granted parole in 1952. After getting out of prison, Malcolm began to study the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. Muhammad taught that white people kept African Americans from achieving political and economical success. Malcolm was a devoted follower and changed his name to Malcolm X. Malcolm believed the name Little was a slave name, so he changed his name to Malcolm X to signify his ancestors. Later, he was appointed as a minister for the Nation of Islam. Malcolm used newspapers and the radio to spread his beliefs. By 1963, Malcolm was credited with increasing the membership of NOI to 30,000 people. Malcolm was then featured in a week-long television special with Mike Wallace. In 1959, after the special, Malcolm was uncomfortable with the fact that his fame eclipsed that of his mentor, Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm's vivid personality caught the government's attention. The FBI infiltrated the organization and secretly placed bugs, wiretaps, and other surveillance equipment to monitor the group's activities. The FBI found out that Elijah Muhammad had an affair with at least 6 women within the NOI. This dealt a heavy blow to the civil rights movement. Hey, can you cover up the affair and the children?
No.
In 1964, Malcolm left the NOI after being silenced for 90 days by Muhammad. Malcolm decided to found his own religious organization, the Muslim Mosque. That same year, Malcolm journeyed to Mecca. On this journey, Malcolm shared his beliefs with several other cultures. After this journey, Malcolm returned to the United States. However, this time instead of just preaching to the African Americans, he had a message for everyone. FBI informants discovered that Elijah Muhammad had Malcolm X marked for an assassination. One undercover agent was even tasked by the NOI to plant a bomb in Malcolm's car. After several attempts at his life, Malcolm traveled everywhere with bodyguards. On February 14, 1965, Malcolm's home was firebombed. Luckily, his whole family escaped. 1 week later, however, at a speech in Manhattan, 3 gunmen rushed Malcolm on stage and shot him 15 times at point-blank range. Malcolm was rushed to the hospital, however he was pronounced dead upon arrival. 1,500 people attended Malcolm's funeral in Harlem on February 27, 1965. Malcolm's assassins, Talmadge Hayer, Norman Butler, and Thomas Johnson, were convicted of first-degree murder on March 1966. All 3 men were members of the NOI.
Martin Luther King Jr. was originally named Michael King Jr. and was born on January 15, 1929. He was the middle child of Michael King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. His father, Michael King Sr., became a pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church upon the death of his father-in-law. Michael King Sr. adopted the name Martin Luther King Sr. in honor of the German Protestant religious leader Martin Luther. Michael Jr. would adopt the name as well and become Martin Luther King Jr. In May 1941, Martin Luther King Jr. was 12 years old when his grandmother Jenny died of a heart attack. He took the death very seriously because he was out watching a parade when his grandmother died, even though his parents told him not to go. Because of this, Martin Jr. jumped from a second-story window at his family's house, allegedly attempting suicide. Soon after, he attended Booker T. Washington High School, where he skipped 9th and 11th grade, and went to Morehouse College in Atlanta when he was only 15 years old. He was unmotivated for the first 2 years of college. He questioned religion and felt uncomfortable with it, and initially decided not to become a pastor. During his third year at college, he came back to religion and went to Liberal Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, to become a pastor. During his last year at the college, Morehouse President Benjamin E. Mays influenced King's spiritual development. Mays was an outspoken advocate for racial equality. During his schooling, he met Coretta Scott and got married on June 18, 1953. After, he became a pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church at the age of 25. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested, and Martin Luther King Jr. went and met with Ed Nixon, head of the NAACP chapter, and other civil rights leaders on the same night she got arrested to plan a citywide bus boycott. King was elected to lead the boycott because he was young, well-trained, with a solid family connection, had professional standing, and was new to the community and had few enemies. So they felt he would have strong credibility with the black community. In his first speech as the group's president, King declared, "We have no alternative but to protest. For many years, we have shown an amazing patience. We have sometimes given our white brothers the feeling that we liked the way we were being treated. But we come here tonight to be saved from that patience that makes us patient with anything less than freedom and justice." The bus boycott would be 382 days of walking to work, harassment, violence, and intimidation for the Montgomery African American community. Those who could not walk to work were driven by anyone who owned a car. Both King and Ed Nixon's homes were attacked, sometimes with bombs, sometimes with gunfire. The African American community also took legal action against the city ordinance, arguing that it was unconstitutional based on the Supreme Court's separate is never equal decision in Brown v. Education. After being defeated in several lower courts rulings and suffering large financial losses, the city of Montgomery lifted the law mandating segregated public transportation. In January 1957, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and 60 ministers and civil rights activists founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conferences, also known as the SCLC, to harness the moral authority and organizing power of black churches. They would help conduct nonviolent protests to promote civil rights reform. The SCLC gave King a base of operation throughout the South. The organization felt the best place to start to give African Americans a voice was to enfranchise them in the voting process. In February 1958, the SCLC sponsored more than 20 mass meetings in key southern cities. King met with religious and civil rights leaders and lectured all over the country on race-related issues. After hearing about Gandhi's success with nonviolent activism, King traveled to Gandhi's birthplace in India. The trip increased his commitment to America's civil rights struggle. African-American civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, who studied Gandhi's work, became one of King's closest associates and counseled him to dedicate himself to the principles of nonviolence. In February 1960, a group of African-American students began what became known as the Sit-In Movement in Greensboro, North Carolina. The students would sit at racially segregated lunch counters in the city stores. When asked to leave or sit in the colored section, they just remained seated, subjecting themselves to verbal and sometimes physical abuse. The movement quickly gained traction in several other cities. In April 1960, the SCLC held a conference at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, with local sit-in leaders. Martin Luther King Jr. encouraged students to continue to use nonviolent methods during their protests. Out of this meeting, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee formed and for a time worked closely with the SCLC. By August 1960, the sit-ins had been successful in ending segregation at lunch counters in 27 southern cities. By 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was gaining national notoriety. He returned to Atlanta to become a co-pastor with his father at Ebenezer Baptist Church, but also continued his civil rights efforts. On October 19, 1960, King and 75 students entered a local department store and requested lunch counter service, but were denied. When they refused to leave the area, King and 36 others were arrested. Realizing the incident would hurt the city's reputation, Atlanta's mayor negotiated a truce and charges were eventually dropped. But soon after, King was imprisoned for violating his probation on a traffic conviction. The news of his imprisonment entered the 1960 presidential campaign, when candidate John F. Kennedy made a phone call to Coretta Scott King. Kennedy expressed his concern for King's harsh treatment for the traffic ticket, and political pressure was quickly set in motion. King was soon released. On August 28, 1963, the historic March on Washington drew more than 200,000 people in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. It was here that King made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, emphasizing his belief that someday all men could be brothers.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last."
Here is a clip of The Hate That Hate Produced, which is one of the videos that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were in.
But of even more interest to New Yorkers is Malcolm X, the Muslims' New York minister. He is a remarkable man, a man who, by his own admission, was once a procurer and dope peddler. He served time for robbery in the Michigan and Massachusetts state penitentiaries. But now he's a changed man. He will not smoke or drink. He will not even eat in a restaurant that houses a tavern. He told Newsbeat that his life changed for him when the Muslim faith taught him no longer to be ashamed of being a black man. Reporter Louis Lomax asked Minister Malcolm X to further explain the Muslim teachings of Elijah Muhammad.
That in the same context that Mr. Elijah Muhammad teaches that his faith, that the Islamic faith is for the black man and that the black man is good. He also uses the Old Testament instance of the serpent and Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he sets up the proposition there that this is the great battle between good and evil, and he uses the phrase devils.
Yeah.
And he uses it almost interchangeably and synonymous with the word snake. Now what does he mean there?
Well, number one, he teaches us that that never was a real serpent.
It was not a real serpent
that went into the garden.
What was it?
But as you know, the Bible is written in symbols and parables, and this serpent or snake is a symbol that's used to hide the real identity of the one whom that actually was.
Well, who was it?
The white man.
I want to call your attention, Minister Malcolm, to one paragraph in this column. He says, and I quote him, "The only people born of Allah are the black nation, of whom the so-called American Negroes are descendants."
Yes.
Now, is this your standard teaching?
Yes. He teaches us that the black man by nature is divine,
Now, does this mean that the white man by nature is evil?
By nature, he is other than.
Well, now, does this mean that he's evil? Can he do good?
By nature, he is evil.
He cannot do good.
History is best qualified to reward all research, and we don't have any historic example where we have found that they collectively, as a people, have done good.
Minister Malcolm, you now in Chicago and in Detroit have universities of Islam, do you not?
Yes, sir, in Detroit and Chicago.
And you take your parishioners, you take children from the kindergarten ages, and you train them right through high school. Is
Yes,
this
sir.
true?
From the age of 4, I think it is, upward.
And you have a certified parochial school operating in Chicago?
In Chicago
And in Detroit.
And in Detroit.
And kids come to your school in lieu of going to what we would call regular day school?
Yes, sir, many.
What do you teach them there?
We teach them the same things that they would be taught ordinarily in school, minus the little black Sambo story and things that were taught to you and me when we were coming up to breed that inferiority complex in us.
Do you teach them what you've just said to me, that the white man is a symbol of evil?
You can go to any little Muslim child and ask him where's hell or who is the devil, and he wouldn't tell you that hell is down in the ground or that the devil is something invisible that you can't see. He'll tell you hell is right where he has been catching it, and he'll tell you the one who is responsible for him having received this hell is the devil.
And he would say that this devil is the white man?
Yes.
Can a white man join your temple?
None have ever joined.
If one came up and attempted to join, would he be allowed to come in and be taught?
No, sir.
Why not?
Well, that's one of the reasons why most people think that Mr. Muhammad teaches hate. But if there is a rattlesnake in the field who has been biting your brothers and your sisters, and you go and tell them that that's a rattlesnake, and all of the harm that has ever come to them has come to them from that particular source, well, then that rattler will think that the warner is teaching hate. He'll go back and tell the other snakes that this man is teaching hate, this man is teaching hate, but it's not hate. It's just that when you study people who have been harmed and discover the source of their injury, the source of all of their defects, and you begin to point out that source, it's not that you hate the source, but your love for your people is so intense, so great, that you must let them know what is wrong with them, what is the cause of their ills. And this is one of the basic factors, I believe, involved when people think, or when the propaganda is put out that Mr. Muhammad teaches hate. He teaches black people to love each other. And our love for each other is so strong, we don't have any room left in our heart.
What do you think of the NAACP?
Islam is a natural religion, and it is difficult to find a black body with a white head and classify that body as something that's natural. Most organizations that represent the so-called Negro, usually we find when we study them that though they are supposed to be for us the leadership or the brain power or the political power or whatever power that runs it, usually it's the white man.